Now, one of the most head-scratching moments in The Force Awakens comes towards the very end of the movie, after Han has been killed by his son Kylo Ren, or Ben, and Rey, Finn, and Chewie get back to the Resistance base, where Leia, who felt Han's death through the Force, is waiting for them. And when they do get back, she walks right past Chewbacca and goes and hugs Rey, because, Rey had known Han for like a whole day, whereas Chewie had only known Han and been with him for something like 45 years. However, as bad as that is, or as little sense as it makes, it doesn't really bother me that much anymore, mainly because J.J. Abrams came out and admitted that, yes, he'd made a mistake to have these two, the closest two people to Han, walk right past each other in the wake of his death. And though you can certainly say, how could you miss or overlook something like that? The truth is, sometimes people do make dumb mistakes or overlook the obvious. And if they can come out and admit it, I'll give them credit and respect for doing that and just move on. That said, a new comic book, that being Age of Resistance Rey #1, has tried to rectify this little mistake by J.J. Abrams at the end of The Force Awakens, as well as a few other things that I'll get to in a moment. Anyway, it starts out fine, showing us how Rey was abandoned on Jakku and how alone she was for all that time, before quickly moving to the events at the end of The Force Awakens, showing us how, yes, eventually Leia and Chewie did hug it out, and we got a few panels of these two talking and reminiscing, I guess you could say, which was all well and good, even though it should have been in the movie itself. When these two are done, then we find out that Leia wants to talk to Rey before she heads off to hopefully bring back Luke, and she asks her what happened between Han and Kylo Ren. Rey then describes what she saw from her point of view and how it didn't really make sense to her that Han would act the way he did. But Leia tells her that that was Han trying to reach and save their son. And quite honestly, this whole exchange between Rey and Leia is quite good. It's both well written and interesting and adds something to the overall story. So much so that it really makes me wish such a scene had been in The Force Awakens. Though actually it looks like such a scene may have been in the movie but got cut, and ultimately will be some of the unused footage they now have available to them and will be used to put Leia into Episode 9. Because this scene here where Leia just says, "May the Force be with you," before Rey leaves in the Falcon, and actually it's the only words these two even say to each other, well, it looks as if a conversation may have preceded it, and again, it just got cut. Anyway, after reading this comic, and in hindsight you could say, it really feels like this would have been a good time and place to perhaps dig into both Rey and Leia's mindset a little bit in the movie, to better understand how both are feeling or what they're even thinking right now. I mean, it's kind of crazy to realize that Leia says nothing about Han's death in The Force Awakens, or even in the next movie. Not one single word. And yes, to be fair, we do see her sense his death and how she reacts to it in that moment. And do keep in mind that Leia has a history of being able to put personal tragedy aside and to do her duty or what's expected of her. Look how well she handled the destruction of her home planet of Alderaan. In A New Hope, when someone even made mention of it or tried to comfort her a little bit, she told them, "We have no time for our sorrows and let's just get the Death Star plans analyzed." The problem with that, though, is Han was that one person who was actually able to get to Leia. He was that one thing she started to care about in spite of herself and her responsibilities. Part of Leia's arc or story in the original trilogy was allowing herself to truly let someone in. So if there was one thing more important to her than her duty, it was Han. And showing that she could kind of easily compartmentalize his death like she had many other things in the past, to me is kind of a disservice to the character. The one time I would have liked to have seen Leia's strength or resolve waver a little bit, and don't get me wrong, Leia is arguably the toughest character in all of Star Wars. Anyway, the one time I would have been okay with seeing her break a little bit was after losing Han, especially since she was the one who asked him to try and bring their son home. Hell, her brother Luke completely gave up on anything and everything he ever cared about when he lost control for a mere moment and almost killed Ben. But Leia is absolutely unfazed after sending Han, the love of her life, to bring home their son, and that ends up getting him killed. Anyway, so even though I do like that we get some sort of scene between Rey and Leia where they talk about Han's death right after it happens, albeit in a comic book of all places, and it is again good and well written for what it is, it still feels like The Force Awakens missed a chance for a great character moment for both Rey and Leia, to take a minute at the end of the film to have these two talk a little bit, and to maybe show us a heartbroken Leia asking a still somewhat unsure Rey to find her brother and to bring him home, and to have her tell Rey that Luke can help her, and she'll find her place with him. Instead, Leia, who looks as unshaken as ever, just tells her, "May the Force be with you," because Rey, the girl who thought the Jedi were a myth, would get or understand that reference. Anyway, the rest of the comic after Rey and Leia talk, I'm sorry to say, was pretty pointless. The compressor on the Falcon that Rey bypassed in The Force Awakens, the one that Unkar Plutt had installed, seems to act up on the way to find Luke on Ahch-To. And Chewie's fur ends up catching on fire because of this and needs to be put out by R2-D2. And yeah, you heard me right, Chewbacca starts on fire in this comic book. It's another one of those things that in a comic, well, it works okay enough, I guess, but in live action would have looked as ridiculous and been as unnecessary as, oh, I don't know, maybe like something like C-3PO and a battle droid swapping heads. Moving on now, they then need parts to fix the Falcon, and it just so happens that a junk planet called the Necropolis is nearby, and they head for it, where Rey has to scavenge for the parts they need alone because her crew or Chewbacca isn't allowed to go with her. And as she's doing that, she begins to realize a lot of these ships are in good condition, and something feels off. Rey then gets attacked by a giant worm-like creature, and we soon figure out that the guy or alien running the place has been tricking people and taking their ships and killing them while they were looking for parts. Rey then runs away from this giant worm thing. Yes, she runs away, she doesn't just kill it with ease or anything, not that anyone would expect something like that out of Rey, and then eventually she comes across a ship that looks like Slave One and takes it to escape. And I really hope it is the Slave One somehow. That way, in the span of like 2 days, she would have stolen both the Millennium Falcon and Slave One, arguably the two most popular ships, among fans at least, in all of Star Wars. She then goes back to confront the alien that runs this place, and she frees all his workers who were actually slaves, and mind tricks the alien into turning himself in to be punished for his crimes, and the comic then ends with Rey handing the lightsaber to Luke, and well, we all know what happens next. And so after the first half of the comic was good and offered at least something interesting, the back half of the comic comes off having the same problem so much of the new canon does. It's a story just for the sake of a story. Because if I want to take this story as canon, which it's meant to be, that means it is happening in the same continuity as the movies do. So I now have to believe that on the way to finding Luke on Ahch-To, Rey had this whole strange side adventure where she escaped a big worm-like creature in a ship that either was Slave One or looked like it, and then she freed some slaves and mind-tricked an alien to turn himself over to the authorities. Anyway, just letting all that go, the really sad part here, or what's worth talking about I think, is how poorly the aftermath of Han's death has been handled thus far in the movies. And I say thus far because, again, I think there was a scene filmed between Rey and Leia for The Force Awakens that got scrapped, and it'll now be used in Episode 9 in some capacity. Still, all we've gotten so far out of Luke in regards to the death of Han was in The Last Jedi, where he realizes the Falcon has shown up and Chewbacca is with it, but Han isn't, which leads him to ask, in a slightly nervous way, where's Han, before the scene just cuts away. Even though there is a deleted scene from The Last Jedi where we get to see Luke mourn Han Solo a little bit, but it gets cut because Rian Johnson didn't think the movie flowed right if it was included, as if getting to see Luke mourning Han, even if it messed with the pacing a little bit, wasn't something we fans would forgive him for. But what's sadder still is at least Luke says Han's name or asks about him. That's more than we see out of Leia thus far. And though, especially after the passing of Carrie Fisher, a scene in Episode 9 where Leia talks about the death of Han with Rey is probably going to be very emotional, assuming such a scene does exist and is used in the movie, which seems likely. It's a little sad that the only reason we'll likely get it is because it's one of the few scenes cut from the movies that they can actually still work with, which means they're forced to work with it in some capacity, or use whatever was said in those scenes, or are forced to give us a scene where Leia talks about Han. And the other reason they'll likely do it is because they didn't have the foresight to see how sweeping Han's death under the rug so quickly and not allowing any of our old characters to really react to it was going to be one of the biggest complaints from fans. Hell, Han's death was shown to have more impact on Rey than either Luke or Leia, though at least we did get Chewie going crazy after Kylo stabs him, and later a moment in the movie where he whimpers and lowers his head. And now, thanks to a comic book, we get a scene where he finally hugs Leia as well. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Have you read this comic, and if so, what did you think of it? Also, is the aftermath of Han's death one of the most poorly handled things in the sequel trilogy? Finally, if you like these, what I call Canon Fodder review videos, let me know and I'll try to do more of them in the future. Whatever the case might be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.